Can you tell me what climate.gov was for those who don't know?
Sure. Climate.gov was a public-friendly source of science-based information about climate, including natural climate variability and human-caused climate change. We provided magazine-style features and explainers, attractive reusable maps and other graphics, classroom resources for educators, and easy access to popular climate tools and data sets. We were operated out of the Climate Program Office in NOAA's Office of Oceanic Research, or the NOAA Research Online Office. And yeah, we had been online since around 2010. We had about 600,000 followers on social media, and we had more than 15 million page views a year.
And what did the team look like? Like, who was on the team and what did you do?
So I was, for about 13 years, I was the managing editor as a federal contractor. And then I also became the climate.gov program manager in late 2023. So I had been a civil servant for a year and a few months when I was fired in February, along with hundreds of other NOAA probationary employees. Our team consisted of our editorial team, content production team consisted of data visualizers, science writers, an artist, meteorologists, and then we had contributors for things like our very popular ENSO blog and Polar Vortex blog. We had scientists who partnered with us. They wrote the posts and we provided editorial polish and also data visualization support.
Yes, the ENSO blog is very popular. Okay, so tell me about what did happen in February and the changes that took place there.
Sure. So climate.gov is still online technically, but it is in a diminished capacity from what it was. Very early in the Trump administration, we were ordered to remove any content that was related to the importance of diversity and inclusion in climate science and services, anything related to the idea of climate equity, which is making sure climate policy is fair, especially to communities that have been historically excluded from public decision-making, public policy, investment. That directive forced us to remove two very important resources from our Teaching Climate section. One was the 2024 update to the Climate Literacy Guide, which was produced by the US GCRP, and as well as our entire collection of classroom resources for educators, because it's a database and there were some resources that were related to diversity, inclusion, and climate equity, and we couldn't just selectively turn off certain resources, so we had to take the whole collection offline. So that was the first change that happened. And then I was fired in February. The rest of the team, who are full and part-time contractors, continued to work for a few months. But then in May, we got word that all of the climate.gov content team was going to be removed from the contract that was up for renewal. And so the rest of the team was let go at the end of May. Then the final attack was that in June, political appointees at NOAA ordered the web operations team to essentially hide the climate.gov homepage by setting up a permanent redirect from the climate.gov homepage to noaa.gov/climate, which the NOAA site is under more direct control of political appointees. Climate.gov was based in one of the science offices, and our editorial policy did not require us to send everything that we publish up through the official public affairs chain of command to be approved or disapproved by political appointees. Scientists reviewed our content and said whether or not it needed to be revised or changed in any way. So now you can't, if you try to go to the climate.gov homepage, you can't get there anymore. They've redirected that site to noaa.gov/climate. And then on the noaa.gov/climate page, they've removed any links back to climate.gov. So you can't find the front door of climate.gov anymore. You can still find the content if you had it bookmarked. You can still find it from search engines, but its front door has been barricaded or hidden.
So unless somebody knew what they were doing, they wouldn't be able to find it.
We don't expect them to leave climate.gov up. we think, I don't have any inside knowledge of their plans, but my guess is that in redirecting the homepage to NOAA.gov, they may plan to migrate over what they consider the good science, like the ENSO blog and the polar vortex blog, things that are more focused on natural climate variability. They may let some of that stuff survive and then take the rest offline. So we don't expect that they were going to leave the whole site up.
Have you gotten feedback from people who utilized this website, like teachers? What have you heard from the community as far as this loss?
Yes, we've definitely, people were very upset when the change happened when we were essentially shutting down operations in June at the end of May. There was a few news stories about that. And so people knew what was happening. And we received a lot of email from people just saying, no, this is terrible. What are we going to do? And, now that we've decided to try to launch a nonprofit successor to climate.gov, climate.us, we have just been flooded with email from teachers and journalists and professors, and not just in the US, but, in the UK and Germany and lots of different places saying how happy people are that we are going to try to rescue the site and the content and bring it back so that people still have access to it.
So tell me where this idea came from and how it evolved and how you've now launched this nonprofit.
Well, we were all sort of reeling, in May when we learned that all the contractors were going to be let go and that was essentially going to be the end. Our team had been working together, many of us, for more than a decade. The climate.gov wasn't just a job for us. It was a mission. We felt that we were providing an important public service, and we were all really passionate about it. We didn't want to, it was hard for us to think about our team dispersing and going on to other things, especially with the possibility of all of this work that we had done and that the taxpayer had already paid for being taken offline or hidden from people. And so, our first sort of group meetings that we had after we learned all this, we were just trying to support each other and think about, how can we help each other with what happens next. But for some of us, it became a thing where every time we would sit down at the computer, this is the way it was for me. Every time I would sit down at the computer to think about updating my resume, updating my LinkedIn profile, thinking about where I might want to apply for jobs. Every time I tried to do that, I just couldn't stop thinking about the fact that they might be going to hide climate.gov, or worse, that they were going to use it maybe to spread misinformation, because especially when there was the report that came out from the Department of Energy where they handpicked 5 scientists to put out a report that challenged the notion that greenhouse gases were a threat to human health and the environment. I thought, they said in a news release that they were considering going back and revising previous versions of the National Climate Assessment, which is the authoritative report on the impacts of climate change in the United States. I really began to worry that they were going to do something even worse with climate.gov than just taking it offline. And so we just started to think, those of us who had not immediately gone on to find new jobs, how can we make this right? What can we do? Science is being attacked in so many ways in this administration, from the NIH to the CDC to the environmental sciences, the EPA, NOAA, NASA. There are a lot of attacks going on, and it can feel overwhelming to people who believe that science provides useful, important information, essential information for us to make decisions. And our team just began to say, well, there's so many things we can't do anything about. But this is our backyard. This issue of censoring climate information from the public, that is something we can do something about. And so we just began to say, what we need to do is we need to come up with a way to move climate.gov out of the federal domain put it in the nonprofit sector where it will be immune from politics and it can stay true to its science-based mission. And so we just began talking about how do we make that happen. We were very lucky. We got a partner, an existing nonprofit named Multiplier, who is sort of an incubator for small fledgling nonprofits like us to provide fiscal and business operation support so that we didn't have to immediately try to apply for 501c3 status. We can operate through them and take advantage of, leverage their expertise and knowledge and that sort of thing. And then, the rest of us have been working essentially without pay. There's been, initially there were 4 of us working full time on it. Now there are just 3. Others have had to go back to work. And so we're down to 3 of us working on this full time. And yeah, we hope that the crowdsourcing funding will allow us to cover some startup costs related to web hosting and web development and maybe a bit of a lifeboat salary for those of us who've been working for months without pay. But ultimately, we do know that we're probably going to need foundation support from philanthropy and, larger organizations. And so we hope that we're able to make that happen.
Tell me about the data. How has that transition gone with getting what was in one place to a new place? And has there been roadblocks as far as getting access to certain data? How has that worked out?
Well, everything that we did on climate.gov and everything the government does is in the public domain. So anyone could do this. Anyone could do this project. Obviously, because it's our team, we have more knowledge of, the intricacies of the site and how it works and that sort of thing. But really, there haven't been, it's a pretty straightforward process in that, there are lots of ways to clone a website, and there are even existing archives of climate.gov from the Wayback Machine and a project called Web Recorder. And so we have clones, we have copies of the site that we'll be able to leverage. Now, one of the challenges is we don't want to, most of the clones that exist, we have clones that existed before January, which before we were required to remove content related to diversity and climate justice. So there are clones that still have that content present. But then they don't have all of the content, the news stories and data visualizations and everything that we made from January till operations stopped in June. So there are also clones that have most of that content, but then those clones are missing all of the diversity and inclusion content. So we're just we have to figure out the best way. And we have technical folks who are wrestling with those questions about how do we bring all those pieces back together to come up with a complete copy of what climate.gov should have been.
Gotcha. You've launched recently, or at least came out and launched recently publicly. What has the feedback been like?
In the span of 3 weeks, we've raised over $100,000 through crowdsourcing. The email box for our general questions and inquiries has been like a fire hose. We've had hundreds and hundreds of emails from people who were able to donate and said they were thrilled, and they were so happy to see somebody doing this. Also people who said, I can't donate, but what you're doing is important. And so, I think that shows that research, surveys, public opinion polls show that a significant majority of Americans understand that climate change is real and that it's a problem. They say they want the government and corporations to be doing more about it. And I think that's true, regardless of party. That's, it's something like there was a Pew study in 2023 or 2024. 2/3 of Americans accept that climate change is happening and that we need to do something about it. Hiding information about climate it's pointless. I mean, it's just wrong. And people need this information because climate change is real and it's happening. We're not at climate.gov. We were never about trying to tell people what to do. The science only tells us what is going to happen if we do one thing or we don't do something. Our decisions as a society about what we're going to do, that depends on more than just the science. That depends on our values. How important are our institutions to us? How important is it that we have commercially robust fisheries, in Alaska? How important is it to us that our communities are not threatened year after year with intense forest fires? We have to bring our values to bear. All we're trying to do with climate.gov is say, this is what science says is likely to happen. To me, I think there's no point in trying to hide that information. And frankly, it's immoral to hide it from people because, our children, our grandchildren, they're going to inherit the climate that we're giving them now. And we can't be simultaneously handing them a problem and then hiding the information that they need to try to figure out what they're going to do. So I think that the amount of support that we've already seen is a sign that people recognize this. People know they need this information and they want to have access to it.
What are your hopes for the future? Are you hoping that climate.us is temporary and that you get back to the point where climate.gov is a thing again, or both? What's the hopes for the future?
I think, and we talk about this a lot among our team, who thinks that the government's going to come to its senses and take climate.gov back and other kinds of climate information. And I think that what we want to do with climate.us is build a site that is resilient and flexible for whatever situation we find ourselves in the future. There will always be parts of the climate communication and climate education and climate literacy space that are really better done outside of the federal space. One of the most frequent sorts of emails that we got and questions on social media, they would say, we love your science content. We love this. Why can't you bring this same approach to talking about climate solutions? And, the response to that was always, well, that's not really NOAA's domain. That's not NOAA's part of NOAA's mission. And so it wasn't appropriate for us to be trying to, talk about mitigation and steps that people could take. Outside of the federal fence, though, that would be acceptable and appropriate. We would still bring the same rigor and science-based take on solutions. And again, never telling people what to do, but only saying this is what you can do if you want. So I still think that there would be elements that would be appropriate to sit outside the federal fence, and climate.us could continue on with that. If things change and NOAA wants climate.gov back and wants to fund it, that would be fine too. We could hand the science part back over to them and carry on with some of the more relationship building, community building around mitigation and how people can adapt to climate change. I think there'll be a role for both if the government does decide it's going to get back into that space.
So what can people expect if they go to climate.us? What will they see there? How can the general American public take advantage of information there?
Well, right now, it's like basically just a description of our project and what we're trying to achieve. You can see how you can donate if you want. You can see the kinds of things that we want to bring back. We've tried to explain, like, this is the stuff that we, the kind of content that we produced on climate.gov and what we want to continue. Our first step, however, was, as we were thinking about what needs to happen, climate.gov isn't the only climate information that the administration is taking offline and making hard to find. One of their first targets was the national climate assessments, and including the latest one, which is the 5th National Climate Assessment. And so we decided that what we wanted to do first was bring that website back online, because the US GCRP, the US Global Change Research Program, that was responsible, congressionally mandated to produce periodic reports on the state of climate change and its impacts on the US, was gutted. earlier this year. All the scientists that were working on the 6th National Climate Assessment were fired, and the 5th National Climate Assessment and all the previous climate assessments were taken offline. So we thought, given that they've interrupted the development of the next climate assessment, we thought it was extremely important that the latest one, the most recent one that we have, be back online, easy for people to find, especially, as I say, news reports suggested that they were considering revising previous national climate assessments. And so we thought it would be very important for the originals to be up and accessible where people could see them and know that they were there and trustworthy. So the first thing that we're going to do, and we hope that it'll be within no more than a couple of weeks, we hope to have the 5th National Climate Assessment website back live on the internet for people to find and use. After that,
Awesome.
We're probably going to take a strategy where we look at climate.gov's most popular sections and content and try to bring bits and pieces back at a time, a little bit every month. Target trying to get our event tracker where we covered extreme events and what climate influences might have been at play in a particular extreme weather event. We might try to bring that back first. And then when we get that one brought over to climate.us, then we might consider our global climate dashboard, where we have little interactive graphs of all the major indicators of global climate change, like sea level rise, carbon dioxide, temperature, sea ice, those kinds of things. So we want to bring things back in pieces.
Well, you got plenty to do there.
Boy, we do.
Why do you think that people try to silence climate science? What's the purpose there?
Well, people and institutions and businesses, they don't like change. Human beings just in general, despite the fact that our adaptability as a species is one of the hallmarks of humanity, we don't like to have to change. And I think, people are, the fossil fuel industry, they've made a lot of money over the years and they want to continue to make that money. They want fossil fuel development to continue and to be the primary source of energy. And so I think that, they don't want it being discussed, what the science says about what's going to happen, what the impacts of unregulated, completely, continued high dependence on fossil fuels. They don't want that to be discussed. They think that maybe they think they can just keep that part quiet if nobody's talking about the fact that the coral reefs, may go extinct, by 2070, if we keep pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. If we don't talk about it, then we can just carry on as we always have. And I think that it's, like I say, it's going to happen. Climate change is happening, and it's going to continue to happen, whether or not they try to hide that information from people. I just think there have been points in human history where terrible, awful things were happening that human beings didn't understand and couldn't predict. Massive volcanic eruptions that, brought about the little ice age in the northern hemisphere, or the bubonic plague that decimated populations. People did not know. There were these horrible things happening that people didn't understand, couldn't predict, did not know how to cope with. Here we are at a point in time where we're facing a serious calamity. We now have the information. We're not ignorant or helpless in the face of this challenge the way we have been so many times in the past. We have the information to try to tackle the problem. And yet there are people who want to try to hide that information. And I'm thinking, what have we been doing as a human species, building knowledge and, trying to understand the world better? if it's not to try to solve problems and relieve suffering, but instead there are people who think, let's just try to hide this and not talk about it, leaving humanity to face this, serious challenge and risk with with two hands behind their back, tied behind their back. I just think it's crazy.
Rebecca, is there anything else you want to add about your project?
I would say that, we are very interested in developing partnerships and collaborations with other people working in this space. As I mentioned, the cuts to science across the government are extreme, and we know that there are lots of other good programs and efforts that have also been cut and are struggling to figure out how they will continue. We want to partner with people. We hope that climate.us can be a cornerstone for other groups who are trying to find a way to keep reaching their audiences and to keep serving the public in the way they did. People who are looking to partner with us can reach out to us at the info@climate.us email. We're eager to collaborate.